Can you see this Excel spreadsheet on that I've
Yep,
shared?
we got you,
Okay.
Les.
So what I've got here is a real quick recap in column C of that spreadsheet that shows on November 20th what we received as preliminary funding that we reviewed with you. And I'm going to go through that pretty quickly since you've seen it and for the sake of time today. But we said that we would have $4 to $5 million that we could borrow from PEPL at that point in time. And then in 2023, we would be able to borrow 45 million of SAVE revenues with the extension, and then another 192 million in 2029 when our current bonds are all paid off, and it frees up us access to all of the next year's 20 years of revenue stream. And then I have the Pearl vote on there, and that's just the 13.5-cent levy that we've talked about. Generates about $925,000 per year. And for sake of, to be brief on that one, that will not change under either scenario, because that's a separate vote that would be needed. So when I get to the switch, I'm not going to spend any time on Pearl because it would have that funding option either way. And then we would be able to borrow about $90 million under a GEO bond. And this is the November information again, and still be within the $2.70 levy rate. Obviously that takes a voter approval to approve any further bond referendum. And then we would have another 233 million if we went to that $4.05 levy. So based upon the updated information of the A, B, and C phases that Dwayne put together and laying out a little bit more of what our costs would look like over the next 10, 11 years. The really good news is that if we approved the voter approved levy in November, we would be able to borrow just short of $50 million or PEPL loan notes in November of 2022. And that would fund everything in phase A as it was originally presented to you. Okay, we're going to present a little bit, some different options as Chase alluded to here later, but I'm going back to that original document that we had. Then if we extend the RPS, we would be able to borrow $96 million in November 2027 and another $90 million in 2029. Now, the small caveat here is that we will continue the PEPL life cycle as we know it for all of those maintenance and those other items, but we would shift some of those expenditures between PEPL and SAVE, which is completely allowable under Iowa code. They're both capital projects funds. So that's why that note is there. That's kind of an internal costing mechanism there, but it would shift that. We would continue to have the Pearl, but the combination of those, the PEPL at 50 million and $187 million of SAVE revenue bonds would leave us short by about $19 million that we would need to fund the rest of the plan that was presented to you a couple weeks ago. Now that could be done with the GEO bond, but it would be kind of expensive to do a $19 million GEO bond for what we have. If we were able to pass the Pearl, that would generate $9 million of revenue against that 19 million and close that gap down to about $10 million. And because of the conservative nature that PFM uses in terms of tax rate growth, sales tax growth, and enrollment growth on the sales tax revenue, cash flows from those two funds over the next 8 years are very likely to close that gap and mean that that original 200 and I believe it was 253 or $255 million project may not need a GEO bond. And so it can be all done with an existing tax levy, our sales tax bond, and a 13.5-cent PEPL, or excuse me, Pearl levy. So if there's not any questions on that, I'll stop sharing my screen because all I can see is a couple of us on my sidebar and Lisa's head going nodding up and down like she kind of likes this information. So
yeah, no GEO bond is happy.
That's great news. Yeah. I mean, how wonderful.
Are you sure about this, Les?
um, yeah, Charlie, to be honest with you, I am pretty sure about this. And the reason being is that when we did this in 2013 with PFM and they laid out the financial plans and the bonding, they provided us with the same conservative approach. And it worked out that we said we wouldn't have to exceed that debt service levy of $1.95. We never even came close to that. I mean, we were like $1.88 or something like that. And it's continuing to go down about 6 cents a year. And so everything that they laid out at that point in time has been met or exceeded. Now, we're in the situation where we're in a pandemic and economic challenges. So, you know, they continue to be very conservative in that estimates, and depending upon how the economy recovers, may tweak this a little bit, but based upon this information, I feel really good about this, Charlie. And, you know, they're only projecting 2% property tax growth on the Pepple side. And we've got a 10-year history of almost 4.5%, and never below 2% in that 10-year period. So I feel good. I feel like those are solid numbers to work from.
Okay, thanks.
So my my initial thought in hearing this is it kind of, not kind of, but it really does shift the work of this committee. We still have the November package that we will want to present to the voters, but then like phase 2 isn't talk about the GO bond. Like I think this committee gets more fun, right? Because phase 2 is like, let's plan it. Or am I missing something?
It does from my perspective.
Well, I think that.
Well, Chase is probably going to explain what I would have said.
Go ahead. I'll defer to you, Matt.
That's all right. And I'm sure you'll expand on it. But I think, yeah, you're right, Lisa. I mean, some of that would happen here, and then some of it's around the community engagement part, right? About still what's in those plans, and then what comes from the visioning work we do in the spring with Portrait of a Graduate. How's that inform those conversations? And so you're right. The fun part of this group then would be figuring out what the outreach to the community looks like, bringing back those community ideas, and then putting together that plan. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
And sorry, Chase, I talked over you there. If you got
we just don't have to worry about the stress of this is all contingent on supporting the bond.
Right. Yeah. And I think it also, you know, allows us to recenter on one of the questions that came up last week about, you know, why November? Why do we have to have this approved in November? And the very, you know, candid answer is that the work in these projects now really won't continue or won't pick up pace until we go back to the voters. And so Les said, you know, that if we pass in November, we'll have access to that money basically a year later. And so really, I mean, they don't necessarily need to be passed in November, but every phase of the plan will just simply get pushed back a year until it is passed, right? I mean, Les kind of, we haven't talked a lot about it, but we really don't believe there is a way to fund the projects on a grand scale without going to the voters. And I don't know if we need to be more direct in some of our statements at the work session next week, but we tried to slice it, Janet, Lisa, and Charlie, about, okay, worst case scenario, how do we start? And the timeline is just, you know, it never ends to try to do some of these things because it's outside the life cycle. And so it does get more fun. I think it really lets us zero in on the importance of these notes, of these votes in November and why it needs to happen, and does take kind of that 8,000-pound gorilla off our back of what's next.
So November would include an RFP, a vote on an RFP for the SAVE funds. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so we'd have to have that RFP in, we'd have to have we'll have to get public support for an RFP, right?
Yes.
Correct you.
RPS?
Technically, Charlie, it's the RPS.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Just,
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Right. But both of those approvals are 50% approvals,
right,
or
okay.
50% plus one.
Right, okay.
So now I'm not discounting the, you know, the no votes when I say that, but it's a little bit lower bar to achieve.
Right.
Now, to back this up as to where the board needs to take action for a November election, is that the August 24th board meeting, the board would need to pass the resolutions for the notice to prepare the ballot to the county commissioner of elections, to Travis Weeper. And so based upon bond council's calendar that they laid out for me, they said the board could have their discussions about the election starting, in June, and then have about 60 days and actually pass the resolution. Well, you're out in front of that discussion here by about 4 months, 3 to 4 months here, by having this discussion amongst the board, and it's getting out into the community into February. So, from that perspective, I think you're in good shape. You're certainly not behind the 8 ball in terms of having an election in November. Doesn't mean that there's still not work to be done in terms of the sharing of information with the community. And at least I think you've laid that out, that you're all aware that's the next step. So.
And going back to the RPS, that has to include all of the projects that SAFE funding would be used to pay for. Is that correct?
In essence, it would, Charlie. However, our current RPS and the one that we would present to the voters is broad enough that it allows us to do virtually any of the construction projects. It allows us to use it for capital projects like PEPL has done. It allows us to use it for community ed that we're doing to match with our 21st century grants, and to use it for technology. So it's written in the broadest sense that it can be. And so it would certainly be available for any of the construction.
So
it's not as specific as that bond language is, Charlie.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. So Janet, are you happy now?
Yeah. Why are you poking on me? I'm happy to do a bond. Yay.
Well, if you think I'm happy that I'm just telling you that you have $100 or $230 million, you should see how happy Dwayne is to try to spend that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, no, it's good.
And so I think that's a good segue into how we started to kind of reimagine this, and really being conscious of the need for community input and looking at Portrait of a Graduate. And so Dwayne, we did what the board wanted. He did develop a 10-year kind of timeline based on the phase A, phase B, and phase C. But the alternative one we want to talk to you about also is we really looked at it from our operational management perspective and said, these are the projects that for us to maintain our facilities at the high level we have them and to continue to move the district forward need to happen. And then in the B side that Dwayne will go through is, these are the projects that various people, the administration, the community, the board, or various initiatives we've heard at that we'd like to do, but we know we need more community engagement around. And so trying to look at, okay, is there a set of projects that we just know, right, that these need to happen? But all these other ones that we know, really, we should get more community engagement around, more communication, and it should flow out of Portrait of a Graduate. And so, Dwayne, do you want to start with Lisa, which would you guys like to see first? Do you want to see kind of that thinking of it, or would you like to see kind of the traditional 10-year timeline?
Let me take them through my thought process.
Dwayne, we only have until 4:55. Remember, I'm trying to keep us moving is what I'm doing. I'm trying to abide by Lisa's guidance.
That's why I'm asking you to let it do it my way, because I'm on the laptop and it's going to be tough enough. So I'm doing this on the laptop through my cell phone Wi-Fi hotspot. So hopefully I can get it through. So this first sheet, no, that's not the one I want to show you. Sorry, I'll get her. How do I stop share? Well, let's just. All right, we'll do it this way. There. All right, can you see that? So this is a work in progress. So just so you know, I mean, this is kind of the thought process I go through. I took that entire list that we had and I mapped it out over the next 10 or 11, well, actually 12 years. And starting down the left-hand side with projects starting in 2023, and then I did it by quarter, spring, summer, fall, winter, and by year, and then I did it by elementary, by junior high, high school, district-wide, and then property in the right-hand column. And I just laid it out over the next 10 years. And this blue line here, this would be Group A, Group B, and Group C down below. And as I was doing this, and I got the good news from Chase and Les about the funding stream, I started to rethink it. So well, one other point I'll make here's, if
Guys, are the rest of you seeing
Wait,
it?
can
I'm
I-
only seeing Dwayne's file
Yeah,
structure
I,
here. So I don't
I
think
was
we're
gonna
getting the
say,
right sheet.
I don't
Dwayne.
want to interrupt you, Dwayne, but I'm not seeing it.
you don't see this,
Do you have two monitors going, Dwayne?
no. Oh,
Yeah, it's only showing the last thing you clicked on or that you were trying to click on. It doesn't show the
Oh.
actual
you don't
spreadsheet.
have this big page.
Mm-mm.
That's
What
it.
if you reload it? I'll try it again. Does that come through?
It's working. Now we got it.
All right, so that's the critical needs. Well, I'll just start there. The last sheet I had up there had all the projects, okay? And down the left-hand column is the years, and then by quarter, and then the blue line was Group A, Group B, and Group C. And then on the far right-hand side, I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I've got the cost of the cash flow by quarter. Can you see that? So that was my first process of trying to map it out. This is what I call, just kind of a visual map saying, where can I stick these projects? Where can I make it work? Where does it make sense? So what you're looking at now, and then I deleted what I thought to be community input, and what's on this page right now are projects that I see that the district needs to do. Okay, and it's top heavy in that original Group A. I don't know if I can make this bigger. So what you're seeing up there is a City High Career Tech Wing, the West High Addition, the West High Auditorium, things like that. The Corville Central front entrance, the entrance at Weber, Hills is still on there, and projects like that, the Wickham Gym, all the HVAC projects, and I still have playgrounds on there, and I still have property purchases. I have technology and infrastructure. So that particular group comes to, and I can't read it because Janet's face is in the way, but I think it says 117 million if I read it right. And it's like 43% of the total. Okay. I should also tell you that I went back on the original project list and I added an elementary school for the southwest part of town. So I added another 19.5 million to the overall project scope. So I put that in there, and now the next group would be the community input. And now, can you see that one? So again, what you see on here are projects that that were open for discussion, of course, that I deemed really need community input, discussion, and that, like some of the additions out there in Van Allen, Garner, Hoover, Alexander, Wood, the preschools, City High cafeteria expansion, Southwest Elementary, the new elementary school in North Liberty, the new elementary school in Dubuque. And those projects came up to, and again,
I don't think you have that on the screen, Dwayne.
I don't?
I'm not seeing it.
Oh, and then switch again.
I think Janet's face is in the way.
Yeah. Okay, Janet, I don't mind looking at your face. I just, that's the original one I had. I'm sorry, this laptop's gonna drive us crazy. Do I have it now?
No, it
Double
doesn't
click
like
on it.
that when you do that one. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Les, you want to try and load it?
It won't let me share the screen.
All right.
So
I have
if you
to
stop
stop-
sharing there, Dwayne, then
I'll
Les
stop
can do
here
it.
and maybe you can load it, Les. But what I'm telling you is that those projects end up being about 57% of the total. So that original package, we have 43% of what I call critical needs, infrastructure needs, future maintenance needs, And this particular group, if Les can
Is
get down to
it-
that bottom line, is 57% or 156 million, I think it says. for
Yeah.
project
Can you,
community.
can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
So if you get down to that bottom column on the right, that'll show them that percentage. So I think it's a pretty good number to work with to start from. You know we have certain needs, but these are and you'll see these are all in originally were group B and group C, which is the way we had it structured. But I pulled out of this list the projects that I think are critical that we need to do regardless. So I guess with that, I can try and answer questions. I'm sorry this didn't come through any better. I had it all laid out on my big screen too.
So I just flipped here and showed you, went back to that master project list that Dwayne started with.
Thank you.
And here's the critical needs where he's got it by the A, B, and C groups. And then the community input screen. So that was very quickly going across the three screens, but see, you can see how they're different. And mine are the PDFs that Dwayne sent me, so I don't have the ability to change the sizes and make it a little easier for you to read and navigate them very well.
We'll obviously do a better job of defining this for your board meeting, but this was a work in progress over the weekend and last night, just trying to make sure I had the right projects in the right place. So I guess with that, I can slow down, Chase.
No, it's good. I mean, and obviously we'll answer questions about specific projects, but I think more than that, we're really looking, Janet and Charlie and Lisa, for some guidance on if you prefer kind of the method we'd already started going down the path and had used in the past of setting it up in our 10-year kind of timeline, or if you like this approach where we just slice it a little bit differently. As Dwayne said, we can provide more detail and build it out, even with some timelines in there, especially for those that would still be on the A side that we think need to move forward sooner rather than later. But before we did that, we wanted to bounce that idea off of you and see where your thinking was as we start preparing for next week.
Well, I definitely like the idea of dividing all of these projects, putting them into categories. And I think that you've done an excellent job, Dwayne, of starting that process. I'm not sure. I have to defer to Janet and Lisa, I guess, and the rest of you on what you think what presentation is more likely to be accepted by the communities. To me, this is a good start, but this may not be the best way to go in your viewpoint.
I think my concern, I mean, now we kind of had this good message around Group A is absolutely, we know we need to do, and we're going to fund it with Save Pearl Pebble. Group B and C are subject to change, community input, and we would do the bond. And that, I think, was helping us focus on, that's why we need to pass this package in November. We don't need to have a 10-month-long study committee on how are we going to spend the money. Like, we're ready to go. The concern I have now is that there isn't the bond. This is going to fund everything, but I don't want to get too bogged down in we have to know everything. We have to know how we're going to spend every single dollar before we're ready to approve the expenditure. And so I'm trying to think of the best way to present this to the community with that in mind. Because what we are going to say is, if you vote for this in November, this is the funding for ABC. And even though we don't know what B and C look like, because we want to talk to you and we want to be partners with the community in designing what it looks like, we are asking you to approve funding now for something that isn't a concrete vision. And I don't think that's what we're doing, but I think it's easily manipulated into that messaging, and I want to avoid that. And I don't know what the best way to do that is. if that makes sense.
Well, I think it does make sense. And I guess one thing I think about, Lisa, is so what can we have done prior to that time, right, to tell that story in that BNC? And so like, is that some of those conversations for BNC are more fleshed out by then. And so while it might not be every detail and dollar, we have a pretty good picture of what some of those expenditures might be, or do we have a framework and a structure that we can talk to folks about what we're going to commit to continue to engage in those conversations, to fill in those? I think those would be a couple things, so either we could accelerate conversations and have them and try to paint a pretty good picture of what BNC will look like by that point, or do we also say, hey, here's the structure that's going to happen that the board's going to commit to with the admin team about how we will move forward with the expenditures of some of those dollars. And so I think those would be two initial thoughts as a response to your question, but maybe that gave the team some think time too for what they might have considered with what you asked.
If I may, back in November of 2012, when I got here, we started working on that, getting the revenue purpose statement passed, and I think it was January or February of 2013. But we did not have all the projects laid out when we passed that revenue purpose statement. We came back with a plan after we knew we had the funds, and that's all that did was made it available to us. It was still at the discretion of the board to come up with a plan and approve project by project is what we did. So I don't know that we made any effort to. We talked in general terms when that general revenue purpose statement was passed. We did not have a specific project list, in my recollection, unless less is different. But
no, and I don't think I'm not of the mind that we need a specific project list, but I have heard that. I heard some of that feedback at the board meeting last week. And I've heard some feedback like that other places. And I think it's because of how the GO bond was set up, that it did have that structure.
That's what people's mindset's going to be around it, right? That should be there. Yeah.
I would
It's
suggest
required though for
giving them a pretty good roadmap. No, I'll shut up. But the roadmap is what you're doing. It's a plan in terms of, in general, that we're going to build this many elementary schools and buy this many properties, and we're going to fix these schools up. So it's kind of a roadmap anyway.
And so I like the presentation, the way you've laid it out, Dwayne, compared to the previous sort of representations. Just to answer that question from my perspective, I like where you're going, Matt. I mean, we're not going to have the project by project before next November, and we don't need to for this kind of money that we're going after. We did have to have that level of detail for the bond. That is what people remember. But I wonder, between now and maybe August, when we have to put our intentions forward to have these things on the ballot, if we can put together some guiding principles for how we're going to manage our facilities and capital projects in the district, maybe that can be an outcome of the Patel work. I'm just thinking out loud. And not just principles, but, kind of a decision-making framework. I think you were getting to this, Matt, right? And to say, okay, here are the principles that we believe in. We'll have community input through Battelle. We care about, up-to-date playgrounds. We care, not just compliant, but best, exceeding levels of compliance. We care about, ensuring we've got facilities to cover CTE and all the special, whatever the guidelines are, principles of decision-making, and then, what the process is for approving projects as they come down the pipe. I think, if we could be transparent about those sorts of things, and maybe even get enrollment, the growth, the
Enrollment projections.
yeah. That could be part of it too. We could have that input before August. So we kind of get a feel for how big or where we're going to be growing. So just to kind of put that parameter in. But I think if we're very transparent, we base it on community input this spring, early summer, we put those guidelines, decision-making criteria in place, codify it somehow, because there's also board member election coming up in November that could see 3 new board members. So I feel like there would need to be some four, right? Because of Dromey's position. So we could see a complete change of majority of the board potentially. So I think we'd want to codify it, the decision-making framework, right, in some kind of board I mean, it would be impossible to completely codify it, but to give it some durability, I think might be helpful too. Just thinking out loud about it.
Yeah,
but-
kind of like value sets around your decision making, right? Like these are the things we're committed to, to fill in these holes that are still here. These are going to be the guiding principles of that work moving forward, so people know, and those are anchored back then to those decisions.
Yeah, we care about expanding preschool, capabilities in the district, or, I mean, just put these things in writing so people see it, and then, try to put some controls in place for what might be big board member transition.
Yeah.
Do we have dates for Battelle yet?
Yeah, we do. And so we've had a flurry of communication that's obviously went out this week, but we will be sending out the first Battelle communication out this week to that design team. So the first one, they're all like in the 24s or 26s. So it's February 24th, March, I think 26th, and then it goes April 24th, and then I think back to May 26th, but don't hold me to those. But that's essentially the sequence. So we'll have 4 meetings, February through May, and that design team will get notified of those this week. So our first one comes here towards the end of February.
And what about results for their recommendations or summations or whatever? When will those be available?
Yeah, they'll quickly pull that together, if not pretty close to a finished product, through the conclusion of that last design team meeting, Charlie. So, it's kind of almost like a funnel, in that how that process works. It starts with, lots of ideas and lots of things. And as we move
Right,
through,
yeah.
then we continue to funnel towards a clearer vision as we get through that. So we'd really be positioned to talk about those, I think, effectively in June, time frame. And so if the last meeting's at the end of May, and then really throughout the summer, we could be talking about the outcomes of that in June through August.
Kind of going back to where I think I heard Lisa going a couple minutes ago about while the PEPAL piece is important now to keep moving forward to do phase A, how does the SAVE or the RPS look with that? And I think it kind of goes back to what Dwayne was saying about having a roadmap. And one of the things that made us successful in 2012 and 13 was having that roadmap while we didn't necessarily have all of the projects. And we still have, as Janet was alluding to, those goals in mind that we want to have. But being for the board to lay out that the plan is for 10 years or 11 years, and here's how we project to be able to fund that. That was one of the things that I think really made us successful in 2012 and 13, and I think would set us up for success moving forward with a 10-year plan here as well. And that's why I think it's important to couple and put those together now, as opposed to separate those and then have to go back to the community and maybe re-explain or re-educate. We have the chance to do it all at the same time. At least sitting from my chair and seeing how we were successful in the past.
No, and at the end of the day, it's a much smaller ask of our community than a $2.30 bond levy. And I think that we'll have to include that with the messaging, right? It's the same messaging as it was before you guys told us this, net increase of 13.5 cents per $1,000 assessed value.
I'm thinking, Lisa, we may need to sit down with Rod Sullivan and have a talk with Rod about sales tax and property taxes as methods for financing this and other work in the district. So
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I
think you're right. It's a much different ask to the community. I think a much kinder ask. I mean, it's, totally different than a bond statement that way. A lot of these are, somewhat regular occurrences in districts, right? And so I don't think it's anything out of the realm that way. And so the roadmap that Dwayne's got there, and then like Janet said about trying to, I think, put in some parameters that we're going to hold ourselves to, or even, the future board is essentially getting elected, saying that they are committed to, or essentially they're going to know those coming in, right? That we've talked about those in the community. And so that's a pretty public, transparent accountability piece to stay committed to, even if those things aren't determined at the time of the actual vote.
Yeah, and I think I'd be remiss, Dwayne, I think that we owe a lot of this to you. So a lot of thanks to you. If we didn't, if I know, Chase, I see you laughing, but if we didn't get that first bond through ahead of schedule, under cost, then we would not be in a position where we're looking at absorbing a $10 million deficit. You know, we would be looking at 30, 40, $50 million, and we would have to bond that. And so, you know, thank you, Dwayne.
Chase is smiling because he's proud, and I'm going to brag on Dwayne for a minute. But people through the state are just shocked that we've been able to do this in Iowa City. I would tell you that. I think they're just amazed, you know, in our ability to pull off that plan, to do it on time and under budget, you know, repeatedly through there. And so I think sometimes that's, you know, not by you by any means, but I think the community's just come to assume that we'll do those things, right? And that shouldn't always be assumed. I mean, a lot of times projects are behind. They're more expensive, and that's not the case we ran into. So yes, big kudos to Dwayne, and I know Chase would continue to send that same message too, and that's why you see us all smiling, because he does deserve a ton of credit. Dwayne's done outstanding.
I can't take it all. I thank you. I mean, it's been a lot of hard work, but I have a great team, Lisa. I mean, I'm part of a team. It really takes a team. One thing I've said in the past is that I'm just the lucky guy that gets to conduct the orchestra, you know. And it, you know, there's all the people in the office, all the contractors, all the design teams, you know, the business office, everything. It all comes together. I'm just the lucky guy that got to do it. So it truly was a team effort, and it never would say anything less than that. But thanks.
Yeah, and I agree, Dwayne. That was a remarkable set of tasks that you had before you. Done very well, done really well. We also, of course, had a lot of community support for the FMP1, and maybe we should continue to mention that as we go forward here too. To give credit to those
organizers as well, but we got through that.
I think Matt mentioned the shock around the state that we pulled this plan off. And I think, Charlie, what you're saying is the first shock was that we passed $191 million bond referendum on our first try, and the community supported us. So to piggyback what you just said is we can't say thank you enough to the community when we go down the road for FMP 2.0.
Les, I think you're right, and I also took Charlie's comment a slightly different way. I think it's something to remember is, you know, if we move forward, make this presentation, or we make this presentation next week, we have to, and I know you all know this, right? We can't be in the business as a school district of going out and generating a say yes campaign, right? And so the Charlie, you talk about community support, and the board would have to make some decisions about, you know, how or if you know, put out a call to get some community individuals to lead such a campaign, if that's something that we want to do, right? Because we have to stay neutral. We can tell everybody the projects and what we're doing, but we can't do an advocacy campaign, although we might have community members, because of the great work that's happened, that would want to do that. And so I think that'd be part of that timeline that we'd want to work through as we get kind of into the nuts and bolts of what this looks like between February and November. Because Lisa, I assume we're probably going to get some of those questions next week of, okay, are you road mapping this? And Les kind of told you some of the points we think are happening in late August. I think the points about what the Battelle work looks like is also important, because that goes to the community engagement piece. And so we can highlight some of these as part of, here's what we think this looks like between February and November, establishing guiding principles, looking at all the different community engagement we can do. So even if it isn't here's every project and every dollar, because I think we all agree that's not exactly where we want to be come November, we can at least signal strong community engagement over the next 7 months.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Chase. And I think we might want to build in some additional community engagement opportunities outside of Battelle.
That's what I mean. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Did we answer your question about what information you needed for the work session next week?
So I think I was taking some notes, and a little bit of kind of what I just said. You know, we would have Leslie go over the new financing. I think that there's support that we would go that way instead of trying to do a geo bond, and we'll explain why. We'll have Dwayne do a recap of the projects like you did for you all tonight. It sounds like we're supportive of that approach. And then we would start laying out kind of this timeline piece of, if the board was going to endorse this plan, here's what we see this looking like from a 10,000 foot view from February until November. That's what serves my memory from last board meeting. I don't know but if there's some gaps that you think we need to be able to answer, that's really what we want to get to tonight too, to make sure that we aren't leaving things unanswered from last board meeting to next week.
And I just add also that the more I think we can stress that these building plans are really going to help us achieve our equity goals and our equity purposes, that will help us in the long run, both with community input as well as to actually get to those goals.
Okay.
And
I think that's a great point, Charlie,
Yeah.
too, and how we
Yeah.
build those into some of those
Yeah.
kind of core value pieces we talked about, from
Right.
that, what are those guiding principles?
Right.
And so I think if we could
Right.
link that into a DEI goal
Right.
from culture or whatever it might
Right.
be, I think you're right. I mean, it needs to drive that, and that should be the intent of it.
And I'll also emphasize our climate action goals too, because that's a major
Yep.
expenditure here. So
Okay.
And then, so the only approval required from the board is to put it on the ballot, which I heard could happen at the August meeting. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So at the work session, I mean, I think that we should, I want to give a timeline to the board so that they also understand when the board action is going to take place. Is leaving it the vote, and can we say, listen, we're going to vote in August, but we're going to be working all the way up and we're going to have regular operations committee updates with the goal of reaching this August vote? Or do we really need to have that August vote pushed back until late July or early July? I mean, the timing of that is I don't want to cut it close, and I don't want to miss deadlines. And I know that happens when you cut it close.
Les, were you looking for as early as we can put it on?
I don't know the date as to the earliest that you could approve it. I'd go back to Beth to see if there's any restrictions on that. The latest that can be presented to the Commissioner of Elections is September 17th. So you technically have a September 14th board meeting to approve it and get it down there within 3 days. But Beth backed us up one more meeting to that to provide that about 2.5 weeks worth of free space, so to speak, Lisa, to not have us butting up against the deadline. But I can certainly reach out to her and see if there's a time earlier. But again, it will give more time to refine and do the message too as well. So I think there's some trade-offs there, but I'll check on that.
But, well, Lisa, I think to kind of not say exactly what Les is saying, but I think I'm picking up on your point is that we build this timeline. We would want to target late June or July to provide the draft resolution to the board so that they could digest it, have a conversation about it, kick back any suggestions to the committee so we could have another committee meeting about it before we would actually bring the final resolution to the board to put on the board for an action item. That's kind of what I interpreted as you saying. And so I agree. We wouldn't come to them in August and then never see the language that we're going to put on the ballot. We would want to build some of that into the timeline and the work that we're doing.
And I also wonder, from the community component, are community cheerleaders for this measure, since we can't cheerlead it and we're going to rely on people in the community, how much lead time do they need? Is it, I don't want to ask people to, or hope that people volunteer to run, not a bond campaign, but a a vote campaign, and that we don't really have it together until July or August for the November vote. And they say, I'm sorry, I needed more heads up. I needed more time. I would be happy to do this, but I just can't cram it into my schedule because I didn't know it was coming.
Think they could.
Well, and I
start
think if
now.
I think what I'm hearing you say, yeah, and sorry, Charlie.
No,
I was
go
just going
ahead,
to say,
Dan.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think if we have a general sense that the board is okay with this path, path, and even if we're not going to bring some kind of a formal draft into June and July, I mean, if there's general consent there, we can engage those folks, very soon and start to get that on their radar. In that sense, I think that's the important part, right? That people, like you said, would know that, hey, you're going to need, would you be able to commit this space for this 3-month time period that when we get close to the election, we really need to ramp up support for this and make sure that it's going to happen. And so we can do that sooner, Lisa, I think, as long as the board commits to this path.
Yeah, then I think we need to make that clear to the board, that while we may not have a vote, we do need to have, somewhat of a commitment so that we can get other wheels in motion. Because I'm thinking of the people who organized the Go Bond, and they are awesome. They're super busy. So
Yeah, they're busy
if we
people.
want super great people to be the cheerleaders, we need to give them ample time to plan around it.
Can we go ahead and could those people share, look at our list of projects and cost estimates as we go forward here?
You're saying, Charlie, if you would identify people to lead that
Well,
campaign, would you have
if-
them see those documents?
Yeah, is that available? Would that be available for them?
Yeah, well, I think when we get something to what a form you guys are comfortable with, we'll want to probably have something out to the community anyways. And I think that when, there would be nothing inappropriate about showing them, this is the roadmap we're pursuing, this is still in draft form or subject to change, but just to have a general idea and understanding of what they would potentially be advocating for, then of course, I think we'd want to show them some of those things.
Lisa, I just double checked the bond council's timeline that they gave me, and their recommendation is actually that Matt would give the recommendation for the ballot resolution to the board on July 13th. So that would be 3 board meetings before we would ask for the actual action by the board to fit the timeline. So I think that coincides with what you were asking about planning this out earlier and getting that communication out. So I think there's a planning mechanism kind of built into her timeline.
I think
Great,
we still
thank
have
you,
work
Liz.
to do to convince the board, though. I mean, I was picking up on some skepticism, and when we were discussing this last meeting, in terms of the timing, and it's a big lift, and maybe the new information is going to help kind of get us over the hump on that one. But I feel like, sort of this set of activities that we've been kind of trying to lay out against a time frame of when certain things would have to be done, and board intent is solidified, the Battelle work, the core values for the decision-making guidelines, the engagement of community members to start being identified as the leaders of the campaign. I think we're going to have to be ready to talk about some of those things next Tuesday, because it is a lot of work to get done between now and November in the midst of COVID time and everything else that we're doing, right? And so I don't want to underestimate the questions that the directors are going to have, and some of the skepticism perhaps not having been part of these conversations. So.
No,
Sure.
I agree, Janet, and that's why I would like to, I feel like we as a board, not anybody particular, but it's not until it's on that vote line that the board kind of picks up their antenna and says, okay, really, what is this about? And so what I don't want to do is have it on the vote for August and then no one have it on their radar.
Yeah.
And then get to August and everyone's like, wait a second, what are we doing?
Yeah, no, we need to signal intent much earlier.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
and I agree
And-
with that completely.
And just because I think that you just named 20 things we have to do between now and August, and we can't leave them all for July.
Right.
So, and it's so much work also that we can't have other board members out of the loop until August and then say, all right, it's ready for your yes vote. Because I think just with the degree of skepticism, I think that's a nice way of putting it, that I picked up on last week too, that's not gonna fly. So,
Maybe we need, maybe we need to assign a board buddy to each of us so we can have a.
So we can go, yes, twist their arms or have
Well,
long conversations of.
just have nice one-on-one chats, you know.
Well,
Yeah. board
Who do you
buddy,
want,
I love
Charlie?
that.
and Janet, maybe you're kind of getting to the heart of the question that Lisa asked me about what we need. I mean, are there other things that you feel like that we can present next week that would help with this, with this skepticism?
I just think sort of a timeline of, you know.
Okay.
I mean, I just think working back from the election, when do we have to get on the ballot? When's the board vote? When do we need to have our decision-making core principles done? Community engagement, to your point, Lisa, following the Battelle work. You know, I think just almost like every month, like what do we need to make sure that we accomplish and check off the list and have the proper momentum. And honestly, even perhaps, yes, if we can get to the board, you know, relatively soon, signaling intent that this is a direction we want to go, but then we've got sort of go, no goes, perhaps along the way before we officially pull the trigger to go on to the ballot, that they're, you know, our world got completely turned upside down last March. I mean, it's hard to, you know, we anticipate that this is all going to work and all work perfectly, but we need to have the ability to pivot throughout this time frame and engage the board in that decision making too, right? I mean, we just need to make sure things are lining up and all the signals are still pointing towards going forward in November.
I think to jump on what you said, when you build the timeline, I think you need to build in benchmarks for the board. So it's not just a timeline of the projects, it's also like the board needs to make, you know, these decision points along the way so that people can see that it's coming at them. And you know, I love unanimous votes, but I don't want to delay a vote to get 7 votes if we have 4 and we're ready to move forward. And so I just think the more that we can front load the information and be clear and lay out the path, if people don't take the time to do the legwork leading up to the vote, I'm not going to be of a mind to say, all right, well, let's delay, because that's going to mess everything up for November.
Yeah.
It sure does help having more consensus than not when we're trying to go after community
Yes.
engagement and voters. And if we've got divisions at the board level, that just fuels divisions from a voter perspective. So, but I'm with you. We don't have to seek absolute, you know, consensus, but I think it'd be nice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we have I think we have enough time that we can do it right. We
Yeah.
just have to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Hey, Lisa, not to cut you off.
Yeah,
I know you
no, we're late.
But Kim
Past your
just,
hard stop.
Kim just texted me and said
We
she has
gotta
to
go.
end this meeting before the next one.
Yep. So the last thing on the agenda is the next meeting. That's March 2nd. We'll see what the work session does, and then we'll take our direction for the March 2nd meeting of the work session. Motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
All right, bye.
Bye.